Recording. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today for our proposal process meeting. I'll start by acknowledging that I'm joining the meeting today from Gadigal land, and I'm very fortunate to live and work most of my life on Gadigal land here in Sydney, and extremely grateful for the care of our country that Gadigal people have always had and continue to have, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and to all Indigenous and non-Indigenous people here today. So the purpose of this meeting is to run through the Give Together proposal process. And it's a really important part of what we do because of the way that our group is structured. We're a member-driven organisation, and that includes any proposals that we want to consider to donate to or fund is driven by our members. So I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today, or if you're watching the video afterwards, to watch it through. If you have joined or watched one of these in the past, it will be fairly similar. But I've also tried to include a bit of extra information based on, some feedback over the years. And I should say, at any time, please unmute and ask a question if you have a question. I scheduled in 2 hours, but I don't think we'll go for 2 hours. You never know how many people will be attending. So we're going to go through today the process. We're going to look at how we as a group make decisions, talk about eligibility for proposals, talk about the proposal form and the video. I'll take you through every section of that so that it makes sense. And then looking at the submission details and some questions. So in terms of the process, all Give Together members are invited to submit proposals each year. So as a collective giving group, we are a type of giving circle that has a democratic process whereby we vote for proposals that we want to support each year. But unlike a traditional grant round, we don't ask organizations to apply for us for funding directly. We look at having this being a member-driven process. And there's a few reasons for that. Firstly, I think it's about making sure that we're reducing the load on organizations as much as possible. So we really try and keep the whole process admin light for the organizations, because many of the organizations who we're working with are very small. Some survive on volunteers, some have teams, but they're generally quite small. And so we don't want to have an onerous process. And that's why we ask our members to actually really drive that process. The other reason that we do that is because by it being a member-driven process, we find that the quality of the proposals is a lot more standard and a lot higher quality, because members are doing their own due diligence. They're making sure that they take a lot of care when developing the proposals. And they're also really importantly developing that relationship with the organization. And because we don't have a million proposals, it allows Give Together to actually develop relationships with those organizations as well. So our proposals are as good as, I guess, our members in terms of what we get from members. And I'm always, most of the slides will have the Give Together email on it, because I'm always here to support people if they don't know how to write a proposal, if they're a bit nervous, if they want to do a proposal but they don't know who to put forward. I always have, I guess, a small amount of organizations throughout the year who reach out when they hear about Give Together and say, we'd love to be considered. And I do have a few this year, which I'll include in an email. But I really want to make sure that you're supported through the process as well, because I know it's not always easy, particularly if you're not familiar with the not-for-profit sector, or you don't do this on a regular basis. Proposals must be submitted by Give Together members. So if you have someone who wants to do a proposal, it's really important that that proposal comes through a member. And so that's just as easy as making sure that if you're approached and someone says, can you propose me, or I've done the form, then you just need to say no problem and submit that on their behalf, because we do need. I'll talk about this a bit later, but we do need members to actually speak about the proposal at our decisions meeting. One proposal per member. So what I would recommend is, if you have a few really great ideas of what you would want to propose, is to work with other members of Give Together to pick up one of the proposals. And you can always do that through me by emailing Give Together email. But yeah, one proposal per person, and the proposals must use the template provided, which you'll receive after this meeting. You also, as I said, need to talk about the organization at a proposal meeting, at the decisions meeting. But importantly, I would never recommend proposing an organization without talking to them first. Occasionally, they may say that it's not the right time for them, or it's not something that they're interested in. Most of the time, really all of the time, I'd say you would get people to say yes. But we have had one or two occasions where an organization has said, look, it's really not the right time, or we wouldn't have the ability to actually deliver that project at the moment. So make sure you always speak to them beforehand. And joint proposals are welcome. So it doesn't have to be an individual submitted proposal. You can put in a proposal with a Give Together colleague. I would just request that it's 2 people max, because otherwise it can become a bit of a bit too concentrated on one proposal. So I think two people max is probably what we would recommend. Now, how do we make decisions? So when you're thinking about the organization that you might want to propose, it's really important to keep our impact principles front and center, because our impact principles guide how we make decisions at Give Together. We have 3 impact principles. They're all on our website, and I've just kind of summarized them here. The first is local impact. So this is 2 things. Partly it's we give where we live. So it's really about supporting local organizations in the communities that we are living in. But we also can consider local, meaning organizations who are working directly with local communities. So there have been some occasions where someone has proposed an organization that they might have been involved with that isn't actually working in their community, but is working with community wherever they're located. And what that means is, in general, we're not looking at big systemic change here. We're not looking at organizations that are, maybe wanting to do a lot of policy work or things like that. It's really about organizations who are working closely with their communities rather than other stakeholders such as government or what have you. Now, most of the organizations we propose will, of course, do both. But yes, think about local impact as local in terms of give where we live, and local in terms of organizations who are working closely with local communities. The second really important one is equitable impact. So this is funding organizations, apologies for the typo, funding organizations that would otherwise be overlooked and lack fundraising capacity or don't fit conventional funding criteria. So I'll give some examples of this soon, but I guess we see like a really big benefit of Give Together is that, unlike other grant makers who might have really strict rules around what they will and won't fund, we as a collective actually have some flexibility around that. And so we can make some decisions around providing our donation in ways that grant makers can't. And I'll give an example of that later, but we've had several examples over the years of organizations who, for whatever reason, would otherwise not really be able to apply for a pot of money in the scale that we give that. And so That's a really important impact principle. And a kind of extension from that is high impact. So what we generally say is we fund organizations that are less than 5 million. Generally, though, what I've seen over the years is that we generally support organizations that are even smaller than that. So really, I would say the rule of thumb is probably around 2 to 3 mil, but we can go up to 5 mil. And that's mainly because we want to make sure that the amount that we donate is going to have a significant impact. It's going to really make a difference, rather than, with huge organizations, our $50,000 donation might just be kind of a drop in the ocean. And so high impact is really trying to focus in on those organizations where we know it will have a really significant impact for that organization. Now, all of that said, these are our impact principles. They're not strict eligibility criteria. So there would be nothing stopping a member from submitting something that falls maybe slightly outside of these principles. And that's fine. If someone wanted to submit a proposal like that is fine, except for I would say that there would be low probability that the group would actually vote for that, because when we have our decisions meeting, we guide the discussion by discussing each of these impact principles to help our decision making. So we will review each application, and we will think about the local, the equitable, and the high impact that application does. So you might submit an organization larger than 5 mil. That's no problem. You would just have to, I think, reasonably satisfy the group as to why that would be a high impact for that organization. And I could see cases where that might be in that you might have an organization where it might really be hard to get funding for a very specific project. And, in order to get the green light for that project, you need to get the funding. So potentially you could make that argument. But it will be up to the group ultimately to decide. So here are some examples I tried to pick 3 examples of projects that I think, meet these criteria over our lifetime as Give Together. So, look, I always like to give the Settlement Neighbourhood Centre a shout out, because they were our very first group that we supported. So the settlement is in Sydney, just around the corner from where I live in Darlington. It is a neighbourhood centre that works primarily with First Nations youth. And in the first year, we gave $14,560 to support the settlement to run their pilot leadership program, in which they took young Indigenous youth through a leadership program, which culminated in a cultural trip to Alice Springs. And it's really transformational what that program does for the young people. And I think it's a great example of local impact, because in one sense, it meets that criteria of we give where we live. It's really quite local to me, and I proposed it that year. But also, it is an organization that works very, very closely with their local community. And one of the reasons I chose the settlement, other than, I think sentimentally we love it because it was our first, but just a week or 2 ago, the settlement held a fundraiser to raise some funds for this leadership program. And so 10 years on, I'm extremely proud of our impact as Give Together, as kind of seed funding that first, making that first pilot possible for the settlement. And now it's a flagship program. And I love this picture as well, because the young guy with his hat on backwards, who's kind of pointing at the man and the boy in the center, his name's Ethan, and he actually went through the program, and he's now employed at the settlement as the youth worker who's running the program. And so it's this beautiful full circle impact moment. And I think that that's something that we can think about as a collective giving group, is how could we with our funding, our donation, how could we do something that may have that really long-term impact? The second one, equitable impact, is another interesting one. It's a documentary called Rosemary's Way. And we gave just over 22,000, just nearly $23,000 in 2019. And the thing about Rosemary's Way is it it was a documentary about Rosemary, who's pictured in the middle, and she is a migrant from Kenya, who lives and works in Western Sydney, and she runs a program that supports migrant women to go on kind of trips into rural Australia where they go on farm stays and they build relationships with the local communities, across regional New South Wales. And the idea of that program is it's about creating community for the women. For many of the women, haven't really been out of the house, or they're not really allowed to, because there's some, I guess, concerns around control of their partners or their husbands, and so that's Rosemary's program. But when we approached Rosemary to see if she would be interested, she said no. She was actually a really good example of someone who said, no, I don't want the money because I don't have capacity to grow. And if I take that money, I'd have to grow. But Rosemary then pointed us to a documentary that was being made about her program, which is Rosemary's Way. And we actually, the project was funded to support a social outreach officer for the movie. So we weren't actually funding the movie itself. That had enough funding. But through conversations with the producer, what they were really struggling with was to employ someone who would be able to get the movie out there. And so it met this criteria of equitable impact because it was a specific part of their project, which was really difficult for them to find funding for. And so we were able to come and kind of address that need. And, by funding that and that position, it was able to employ someone who was able to get the movie into a lot of the Sydney Film Festival, a lot of film festivals. It really raised Rosemary's profile. Of course, it's not really because of us, but I like to think that we contributed to helping Rosemary's profile be raised. And she then went on to win the Australian of the Year Local Hero, I think in 2020, 2021. And, she's actually, she then wrote a book, and she's continued to kind of really carve out her community leadership. So that's an example of where I think we were able to address a gap for a project in ways that they were not able to otherwise get the funding. So that's the equitable impact side. And in terms of high impact, I wanted to use a recent example. So SuccessWorks, which I believe most people here or within Give It Together will be aware of, because we supported them last year with $35,000 in 2025. And I just think it's such another proud moment for me with Give Together, because it was supporting an organization that was quite small. It had only been around for a few years, like 3 years, I think. But it really addresses all three of these criteria. But really, the money that we were able to give helped SuccessWorks launch a community hub or drop-in center for women who have been criminalized and are exiting the justice system, to kind of get some peer-to-peer support and get on the track to employment. And so I think it was great for us to be able to fund at a really important time SuccessWorks as they're kind of on their growth journey. And I have no doubt that they will continue to grow and be a $10 million organization in no time. But at the time that we were able to support them, that $35,000 that we gave was significant, and it allowed them to achieve one of their goals that they otherwise, wouldn't have been able to achieve, or it would have been very difficult for them to continue to try and find funding for that. So Yeah, I thought those were three nice examples across our community. Um, I do also, as not just with SuccessWorks, I think all three really meet the different kind of impact principle criteria, which leads me on to my next slide, which is that sweet spot. So if you're considering a proposal, try and think about how it meets each of those criteria. And if you can, ideally, you'll get that to that middle point, which is where we're giving with impact. Now, it's not essential. Not every project will meet all three criteria. And sometimes, and we've had examples of this, sometimes a project won't necessarily meet one of the criteria, but the strength of the impact in the other two areas, or even sometimes maybe in one area, is significant enough. And so, yeah, I would say don't be limited by it, but try and think of that sweet spot, that middle ground where it is about giving with impact. Now, I'm going to go through the next stage pretty quickly. I have to say, I've just had Zoom tell me that I'm running out of time. I didn't realize I did, so I might just pause for a quick minute. I'll just pause the recording and just try and sort this out if you give me 2 seconds. Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. Now, were there any questions so far on any of the things that I've touched on?
No, that's
Yes,
good.
I'm not quite sure, with the equitable impact, as far as is it the people that it's having an impact on, or is it financial, or
Mm.
what do you mean by that,
Yeah, no,
equitable impact?
it's more. And so the way that uh, well, firstly, what I would say is any of these, because we make decisions as a collective, we use them as guiding principles, but
Mm-hmm.
we will still discuss this. We will still discuss each proposal in detail at the meeting. Um, what we more look at with equitable impact, though, it's about whether there are any barriers to the organization being able to either get funding or to get funding for that
Right.
project, rather than the beneficiaries of the project. So another
Mm-hmm.
example that I always use is a few years ago, we supported an organization called PartnerSpeak, who support the non-offending partners of men
Mm.
who have been accessing child exploitation material. So it's a really important cause. Everybody agrees that the partners of those people need support, and that PartnerSpeak, that's what they were doing. They would come in and support the partners. However,
Mm.
given the kind of nature of the subject matter, they always found it very, very hard to get philanthropic partners, because people would
Mm-hmm.
appreciate the importance, but it was a barrier for them. So that would be another example of equitable
Mm-hmm.
impact. Or the other one that I always do is we funded a composting toilet in Alice Springs,
Mm-hmm.
because really it was very hard again for that group to raise money for capital for a toilet, to build a toilet. But also the
Mm-hmm.
Alice Springs community is so small that it was very hard to raise funds locally for that. So that's what we
Mm-hmm.
think about when we think about equitable impact. It's more about the project or the organization. And that
Mm-hmm.
is the same for each of those impact principles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so good question. Thanks for that.
Yeah, no,
Okay, let
that's
me
right.
move on. So eligibility. So we don't have that much eligibility because we are not grant makers. We are collective donors, and so we will be able to make the decision about where we want the money to go. But there are some criteria. We're looking for Australia-based organisations at the moment. Now, I should note that the organization itself who we're funding needs to be in Australia. It does not preclude them from potentially carrying out work overseas, as we had with last year with BMETS, the Blue Mountains East Timor Sisterhood, or sisters, I should say, who built a preschool in Timor-Leste. But BMETS itself is a local charity or not-for-profit. So that they do need to be based in Australia, and that's linked into then the next one, which is that they must have DGR status. So they must be able to issue a tax receipt, because at the end of the day, Give Together is just facilitating the giving. We're not issuing the tax receipt ourselves. And so the organizations who we give the money to need to be able to give us a receipt, or they need to have a partner organization who can auspice their receipt, which happens all the time. We often will be funding an organization that is so small that they don't necessarily have the DGR status themselves, but they have a community partner who will auspice that funding for them. So technically, our donation goes to that community organization, and they then distribute that funding to the proposal that we put forward. Now, I've said it needs to fit at least one of the impact principles. I put that as eligibility because I think if it doesn't fit any of those impact principles, then it's probably not right for our group. As I said, at least one, ideally more. Most actually will cover all three in some way or another. They also must be able to issue individual receipts. So what I mean by this is Give Together facilitates the donations. So really, at the end of the day, we're not giving away one big $50,000 donation. We're giving away $51,000 donation, give or take. It's really $1,040 per year. But the organization needs to, the only real big bit of admin that they need to do is to be able to issue those receipts individually and send that out to individual members. And I will provide a data sheet that they can easily draw on to issue those receipts. So it shouldn't take too much admin time, but they do need to be able to issue receipts individually. So if you're proposing someone, just make sure they're aware of that, so that they're not going to be just doing one big receipt. It will be those individual receipts. Submissions must be made to be eligible. They have to use our template, which we'll go through in a minute. That there is an optional video, but to be eligible, they must use the template. And that's just to keep it as fair as possible, and as easy as possible for us to become familiar with the structure. And they must be submitted by the due date. So, look, if you run into any major issues, let me know. But in general, to keep it fair, they do need to be submitted by the due date, which I will go through shortly. I'm now going to jump into the form itself. So I will send out the form via email to all Give Together members tonight or tomorrow. And then there'll be about 2 months to pull it all together. But I just think it's important to briefly go through each section and really allow you the opportunity to ask me questions to clarify anything about the form. Now, this form has been developed kind of borrowing from other processes, but in particular, it's most similar to perpetual grants, where there's a focus on the organization and the outcomes rather than the nitty-gritty of the project itself. And that's because when we're giving with trust, and we trust that the organization will use that money to the best effect. We do generally center it around a project, because that, I think, brings it to life for members. But yeah, it's the perpetual forms that we are most similar to, but we've kind of tweaked it a little bit. So the first section of the form is really capturing organizational information. And this is really, really important for me. So we need the organization's name, but then we also need a contact person. Now, the contact person is not the person submitting the proposal. The contact person is someone in that organization who I can go to ask for questions if I need questions about confirming the receipts or what have you. So that's a contact person within the organization, and the address, the email, and the website, the phone number. These are just things for us to keep for our records. And providing the website is also then useful for our members to come and kind of have a look at what they do and do their own due diligence before we discuss it. They also need to clarify whether they can issue receipts. So do they have DGR status? And if not, that's fine. If it's going to be auspice, just to give us the name, website, and contact details of the auspicing body. And if it's available, a link to the most recent annual report would be great, particularly if it's not on their website. If it's on their website, it's generally easy for us to find. But if they don't have it on their website, if they can send it as an attachment, again, that's so our members can just do their own due diligence. Noting that it is always possible that the project or the organization or the group who is being proposed may not have an annual report. So if that's the case, that's fine. You would just leave that blank, or you would just say, no annual report available. And then we can discuss why that is in the decisions meeting. But I can totally see cases where a proposal would be for an organization that, doesn't have that requirement, or, they're in their very early stages, so they haven't done annual reporting. So, but if it is there, we would love to see it. So that's the organizational details. We then ask some tick box questions around the revenue size of the organization. And then it's good for our group, I guess, to get an understanding of generally how the organization's funded. It doesn't really have any bearing on our decision. Well, I shouldn't say it doesn't, it may, but it's more just to give us an understanding of the organization, really. So we have a better understanding of how it's structured and how its funding structured. It's also good for me to know because sometimes, so recently I have become more involved with Philanthropy Australia and advising them on collective giving in Australia. And so if I'm able to collect some of this information, I can pass that on, obviously in a anonymized way, so that they kind of understand as well the types of organizations who are recipients of collective giving or giving circles. So that's why I like to collect some of that information. But again, it's not assessed. Now, these two sections are, they're more general, so they're not about the project specifically. But it's good for us to understand what are the greatest challenges that the organization might be facing. Now, those sometimes are going to be very shared across the sector. Sometimes they'll be very specific and niche to that organization. And then the second is just the organization's mission, vision, mission, and purpose. Most of the time that will be on a website, but it's good for us to just capture that on the form. You'll see with any of the open text questions, there is a word limit. I would really appreciate if we can stick to the word limit as much as possible. We won't disqualify anyone if they go over, but it just means it's as easy as possible for our members to read through and engage with the proposals. Over the years, sometimes we've had proposals that have been way too long, and I really do think it's impacted on their chances of actually being funded, because I think sometimes people don't read it if it's too long. So if we can stick to the word limits, that would be great. We then moving on in the form, I ask the question, describe the problem that you're trying to solve with the project or the program. And with each of these questions, I've put in italics a descriptor of what we're kind of looking for. And this is really for you, the proposer, so that if you're working with the organization to fill these out, it gives you some understanding of what we're actually looking for in the response. So, for example, with this response, we're looking for an understanding of what the project is by providing context of the underlying issue. So that's the root cause or the underlying issue that we're trying to solve with this project. This next question is how the organization or how the project or organizational program addresses this problem. So you're describing the problem in the first question, and then you're talking about how your project or program that you're proposing will address that problem. So that's kind of the details of the project. And once you start to fill it out, I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing to note, the reason I put project or organizational program is that Give Together does not only have to support new things. We can support existing programs that still just need ongoing funding. So an example of this would be a few years back for Welfare Rights Centre. We funded an Aboriginal liaison officer, which was an existing position, but the funding for that position was kind of coming to an end. So we funded for that position to, I guess, extend its life for another year. And it was good that we did because now that position has been funded subsequently from our donation. And so we say organizational program because I don't want people to think we only need to propose things that are brand new. It can be something that is already existing within the organization that they still need money for. I'll pause. Any questions? Feel free to unmute. Otherwise, you can hold them and I'll ask for questions at the end. Okay. Now, we ask for 1 to 3 outcomes that we expect to see from the project or program and how it will be achieved. So when we think about outcomes, it's just really about thinking about what's the change that we're hoping will come from this program. And so again, it's really an impact positioned question. So it's helping Give Together think about the impact of that project. So if we were to fund it, what would the changes be within the underlying issue, or what would the changes be for the primary beneficiaries, the people who benefit the most from that program? So if you're looking at the settlement leadership program, one of the outcomes might be a greater sense of cultural connection. So you're looking at that increase in cultural connection really is maybe one of the outcomes of the program, or it might be a greater sense of confident leadership for the young people who attend the program. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Again, it doesn't need to be too long. It's just to give us an understanding of what we're really funding, what change really we're looking to fund or looking to donate to. And I've said 1 to 3 because sometimes you might have just a very, very specific project that really only has one very clear outcome. And the more money we can get, the more we can achieve that outcome. So 1 to 3. And then any additional information is just if there's anything else you want to tell us. Now, I haven't put a word count here, but I might actually add it because sometimes I know that people sneak in a second application in the additional information section. And so we don't want that. So I might put a word count in there, but that's just in case there's anything very specifically that you would want Give Together members to be aware of or know related to your organization or that project. Now, we ask, will you be able to report back on the outcomes of the project? So this could be a report, videos, photos, stories. It might even be inviting Give Together members to attend an event or to attend, for example, if we funded, we funded this center at SuccessWorks, then they might have said, come and have a look if you want to come and see it. We just would like to know yes or no. I'm sure that everyone will always say yes. But the reason we ask for this is just to get people to think that it would be good for us to be able to feedback to members. I try once every 2 months to report back to our Give Together members about the impact that our donations are having. So it would be great if they can. Please if you're proposing, please really stress though to the organization that we are not acquitting. Like we will not be acquitting it. We do not need any acquittal report or any report back in that sense. It's more about just giving us general information to so that we can see whether or not our donations made a difference. And a report is fine. For example, sometimes an organization might do an impact report for a project for something else, and they can just flick it through to us so that we can see as well. Videos, photos, they're all great. And then this is a really important one to remember, to ask them to complete. If successful, can we use your project photos or impact stories on our website? Because we do put all of the recipients on the website, and over time we'll fill that out with impact stories. But we want to get their consent before doing that. So if we can make sure that they tick that. If they don't consent, then we will just not put the details on the website. But I would hope that they all do consent. I'm going to very briefly go through the budget because you will see in the proposal form this will be outlined. Now, as I said earlier, we're not acquitting anything, and so this is what we call an indicative budget, and it really does help us understand how that money will be used. It's not like we're going to hold people to this. So if someone said, look, we're going to use $20,000 for staff salary and $20,000 for resources, but then in practice they needed $30,000 for the salary and only $10,000 for the resources, we're not going to go back and ask them to explain that. But it is important for us to have the indicative budget because it helps us understand, again, how that money is going to be spent. So what I would say to people who are doing proposals is don't stress too much about the budget. But what we do want is to see how the answers in the previous questions come to life through the dollars. And just round to the nearest hundred. It does not need to be that detailed or specific. It's really important that they indicate if they would accept partial funding. Everyone always says yes, except for maybe one time we had someone say no. We either need to get this fully funded or we're better off not taking the funding. So they need to indicate that, and they need to indicate about the tax receipts again. So briefly, example, these will be on the form, but there's two types of budgets. This one's a little bit more detailed. So if we say that we've got a project, which is a 6-month social media campaign tackling vaping for youth from Sudanese backgrounds in Western Sydney, so a very specific project, you may put this as the budget. So a part-time coordinator for 6 months, social media campaign materials and some admin. That's the level of detail we need. We do not need one part-time coordinator for 6 months for 7 hours a day, SHADS award 5, we don't need that level of detail. Just general costs so that we understand generally where the money is going to be spent is fine. I think it's totally acceptable to even do a higher level budget. So if you run an employment, 3 employment expos in regional Victoria connecting women returning to work with prospective employers from different industries, you might say, look, we're going to have $15,000 per expo. That's $45,000 and we're going to have $9,000 in admin. Okay. So depending on the project, it might depend on what level of detail you need to put in. The one caveat is if you did put something like this in, you might still be good to have some idea about what that $15,000 means in case a member asks. However, when we are having our decisions meeting, I will generally try and steer the conversation, so that it can be a lot of pressure for a proposer, because generally you don't know that level of detail, because you don't work within the organization. And so if people do start to try and get too detailed, I will generally step in and say, let's elevate the conversation a little bit. This is just an indicative budget. the person proposing doesn't necessarily know the answers to all of these questions. Ideally, if people had those level of detailed questions within the 2 weeks that they have to read through the proposal, they might be able to come up with some of those answers themselves through their own due diligence. Okay, so the final thing which we introduced last year, which was I think something that added a lot of value to the process, is just a 5-minute video. And so the reason we started doing this is because some people who were proposing organizations felt rightfully a bit uncomfortable feeling like they had to represent an organization that they didn't necessarily work for. And so I think that that's a very valid concern. And so we've now introduced the idea of the organization can submit a 5-minute video. And I really want to only 5 minutes max because we have a lot to get through in the meetings. And it allows us to hear the voice of the organization and hear what matters for them. And it really allows the organization to represent themselves and their project, which I think generally will come through much more authentically than someone who's proposing from Give Together who may not have that deep knowledge of the organization. And so this is totally optional, but I think it really adds a depth of understanding in our conversations. And like I said, I want it to be 5 minutes max. And I really want to stress that we really want minimal production value here. So we don't want I've just noticed another typo, sorry. We don't want like slideshows and special effects and things like that. It's literally someone sitting in front of the camera and just talking about, this is our organization, this is our purpose, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, this is why we exist, this is who we exist for. We want it to be minimal impact on the organization. And we just want it to be from the heart and just very easy and straightforward. So once I know who's proposing, I will talk to them more about the video. But I'd love to see those become a staple in our decision making. So some important deadlines. So well, the really important question that a lot of people have is how much money are we talking about? So at the moment, we're looking at $56,160 is the full funding pot. And so that would be what we can fund up to. Now, someone might submit a project that actually costs $70,000, but if we can, fund 2/3 of that or whatever, that's great. But that's the total pot that we have. That, I guess the caveat here is that I never know until the end of the year whether everyone is going to be able to make the contribution. Every now and then we will get some people drop out. However, we do also have some members who are committed to say, look, if we're saying that that's the amount, then we'll look at how we can top it up if we need to. So I think you can safely say that it's going to be $56,160. I think you can even more safely say that it will not be less than $50,000. So that's I guess the amount. We will open the applications today or tomorrow as soon as I send out the email, and then we've got 2 months. So I want to give enough time for people to really think about who they might propose, pull a project together, pull a proposal form together and submit. Once I get them all, I will then circulate them to all members. Everyone has 2 weeks to kind of digest, read through, and then on the 14th of June, we'll have a decision-making meeting. I'm putting that in as a tentative date at the moment because it's really important that all of the proposers can be there if possible. So I will always talk to the people who have proposed to make sure that that date works for them. But that's indicative. I think we will be pretty much on the 14th of June or somewhere around that date. And again, if you have questions, I put the email at the bottom. You can always email me. I'll briefly run through some frequently asked questions. So what happens after we submit the proposal? Well, as I said, 2 weeks to read and research. We'll then have a decisions-making meeting around the 14th of June where we discuss, after which we will vote, and whoever gets the highest votes is who gets our donation. What are the responsibilities of the proposer? Okay, so you've thought about an organization. First thing is to liaise with them, find out, are you happy to be proposed? Explain a bit about Give Together, share our website so that they can kind of do their due diligence. You then complete the proposal form. Now, that can be completed by you. I'm aware that most of the time that's a collaboration between the organization and the proposer. They will have to put a lot of the content in. You can then finesse it to make sure that it speaks to, our Give Together principles. Make sure you submit it on time. Now, proposers or a proxy, a Give Together proxy, so someone from Give Together, must also speak to that proposal at the decisions meeting. Now, we try and avoid having like a pitch type session. I know it will still feel like that for most people, but we do try and have it as an open discussion, and you just need to speak about your proposal for about 10 minutes. Now, sometimes you just can't come, and so someone within Give Together might be your proxy, or sometimes you just might feel petrified about public speaking, and so someone can be your proxy. I really don't want that to be an inhibitor for you to submit a proposal if you want to. So if you really are worried about speaking at a decisions meeting, but you are keen to put a proposal in, just let me know and we'll work it out. I can speak for it or someone else. And it really doesn't impact the result, because we've had on at least one occasion, potentially even two, where the person who was proposing couldn't be there or didn't want to speak. So someone spoke for them and they were still successful. Now, how are proposers supported? I really want to stress that I'm here. I see my role as Give Together facilitator as your supporter. I will not put in a proposal. I don't put in proposals anymore because I want to make sure I'm spending my time supporting other members who are putting in proposals. So I request, if you are going to put in a proposal, that you let me know. And then I'll reach out to you and I'll support you every step along the way. I can provide coaching, I can provide advice and support throughout the process. I'm happy to review applications, and I will give you my honest feedback on how I think it can be strengthened, or what bits I think are really strong and what bits might need to be developed more. I can give my thoughts on how it might land based on other previous years. So I'm happy to just be available to anybody who's putting in a proposal because I see that as a key part of my role. Do I have to apply for a project, or can I just propose an organization? You don't need to apply for a project. You can apply just for an organization. So you might have an organization that you love, but, as I said earlier, they just might have programs that they just need funded, and they're not necessarily wanting to create something new. So that is absolutely fine. In fact, I would love Give Together to move to a point where we are actually just funding organizations, not necessarily projects, because of the impact that organization is having, or the potential impact. But at the moment, it can be a proposal, it can be an organization. What I would suggest is, if you are going to propose just an organization, it does still need to be clear as to how the proposal meets the impact principles. And you will still need to include outcomes, that just those outcomes might be broader organizational outcomes, or it might be for a particular program within the organization. So yeah, you can, but most of the time it is a project, existing or new. If my project doesn't have DGR and they cannot find an auspice option, what should I do? Well, again, I don't want that to be an inhibitor. So if you speak to an organization and they don't have DGR and they also don't know anyone who could provide auspicing, just let me know. We will find, with enough notice, we will find someone who can auspice. Worst case scenario is it may have to go through a community fund who will take a bit of a fee, but most auspicing, or all auspicing organizations will take some fee. So if you are looking at proposing something, no DGR, they don't have any auspice partners, please let me know. Just let me know with some time so that we can, get our act together. But I'm very confident we'll be able to support finding an auspicing partner. Can previous organizations reapply? Absolutely. You can reapply for the same project. You could reapply for a different project. I think if you reapplied for a project that was already successful, you would have very low chance of getting funded again. So I am talking more about organizations who have previously applied but have not been successful. What I do say though is if you reapply for the same project, 2 years in a row and it's not getting up, then I would say wait a little bit before reapplying or just apply for a completely different project. And that's just because, it's clearly not something the group is responding to. Remember, when I share the votes at the end of the year, I share all of the votes. So if you were involved in a project where you proposed it and it had very few votes, it just might be an indication to not reapply for the same project. So it's about working with that organization to think about a different project. How much we are donating. So I went through this before. We've currently got 54 members, so we're looking at $56,160. Can I apply for projects that are less than the full donation amount? Absolutely, as long as they meet eligibility and impact principles. So occasionally that will happen. It happened last year. It's happened once before. You might only need a small amount of money, and so you can apply for that. But most organizations can, and I think should, go for the full amount because we are, after all, giving it a donation. So it's a really great gift for an organization to have. So that would be my encouragement. And can an organization receive partial funding? So yes, your organization may receive partial funding. So that would happen in a situation where the organization that gets the primary vote has not asked for the full amount. And so then there's some leftover amount, and then that will go to the organization who is the second vote. But please just indicate whether or not on the form you would accept partial funding, which again, everyone can and should. But every now and then, maybe an organization will say, no, if I can't fully fund the project, I don't want to, go ahead with it, which is also fine. All right, that's now it for me. So I'm just going to pause and ask if there are, I've been through a lot of information pretty quickly. So please let me know if you have any questions, any ideas, if you wanted to discuss anything. Yeah, go Stephen.
Thanks very much, Tom. That was all very, very clear. I've got a question about the actual meeting where the proposals are pitched.
Yep.
I guess you don't want to have any members of the organisation present even to answer questions?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question. We have, we don't know is the quick answer to that. So that's one of the reasons why we have introduced the video. Now, the main reason that there's two main reasons that we don't do that. One is, again, we want this to be a member-driven process. And so it takes the burden away from the organization and puts it onto the member. But secondly, and I think probably more importantly, is that it's always the case that not every proposal someone can come from that organization. And so then it just creates a bit of a unfair balance. Now, one of the ways around this could be that maybe we could do this, is that we have the proposal meeting, and if there are any questions that we can't answer, we give it a week or we give it a few days to get the answer before we open the voting. And so then that means that we can provide that answer when we open the voting, just in case there is anything. But I think what I always encourage us to think about is that give together, we want to do our due diligence, but we're not grant makers, right? And that's by design. We're a collective giving group. We're a giving circle of individual philanthropists who have decided to pool our funding to have a greater impact. And the reason I mention that is because particularly for people like me and many people who work in the space and we sit on some boards, we can have a tendency to get really detailed and into the weeds because we feel, like, that's where we're comfortable and familiar. But I would be encouraging members to think about what amount of information do we need to be able to make a comfortable decision? Because at the end of the day, we're giving a donation. And so we give the donation for a project, but we also absolutely trust that organization that if something else comes up that's a higher priority, they might need to use that money for something else. And I think that's okay. Like it's about that trust. That is a good question though. So I'm very open to other ways that we might deal with that. There is another giving circle, which I won't name, but they're pretty big and they're international. They have chapters all around the world, and they have a model where organizations come and they do the pitch. And it's a big thing, right? It's a big event, and they have to come and they pitch to all these people, and then the audience who are the members vote and similar to us. But I've had a few colleagues who have been from organizations that have gone to do the pitch, and they've also I guess they've said it's a really harrowing process for them too. So I guess that's kind of why we want to avoid that. But I'm very open. Like if we feel like that would enrich the conversation, we can do that. My main concern would be it either has to be that everyone can be there, or we can't have it just because it makes it unfair. So that's why we introduced the video, is to try and do that. But yeah, there are sometimes questions that we can't answer on the day, which is a bit of a limitation of our process. I don't know. Did anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I think the application process and the video should anticipate questions, really, if it's done well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And also, like, I guess in a traditional grant process, you don't have the ability to answer the questions either, right? So I think, as you're saying, it's about anticipating what those questions might be and making sure that's kind of anticipated and addressed. And I would encourage you to run applications by me, because that's the type of thing that I will do, is I'll look at that and say, what about this? What about this? What about this? So there is that layer before the meeting. And actually that doesn't even have to be just me. We might see if there are a few other Give Together members who are interested in, supporting that type of process as well. Like there's no reason it has to be just me.
Yeah,
great
I
question.
was thinking the same thing. I was just thinking the same, Tom, that really if in that 2-week period before the proposal, while the proposal's being considered, but before the decision, if there were questions that you thought would impact your decision to make a decision, it really should come through, and the organisation or group of people should have the opportunity to answer that question before the decision.
Love that, and that's a much simpler solution than what I was saying. So yeah,
No.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in a way, I could even make the proposals due 1 week sooner, to give 1 week extra for people to read. And we could say, look, if you have questions, ask them within that first week, so that there's enough time for them to be, addressed. But yeah, that's a good idea. So maybe when I send out the email, I will encourage people to make sure that they're aware that when they get the proposals, there'll be a window where they can ask questions before the decision meeting so that we can get as many answers as we can before the decisions meeting. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, you don't want to
Simple
get
solution.
swamped. You don't want to get swamped with lots of little questions, but if there's something you think would affect your decision, sometimes groups, if they're on the run, just doing what they do, good works, might have not even thought to put it in their submission.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other important part of it is I really don't want proposers to feel under pressure either, because it can be really hard if you don't know the answer. So
that's right. Yeah.
Having those submitted earlier would be a great idea. Any other
I think
questions or
you've
thoughts?
done a marvelous job, Tom. You've explained everything that I wanted explained. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Yeah, I think every year we learn a little bit more, and I add a little bit more in to kind of make sure that we're covering everything. One year I'll get it perfect with no spelling errors or anything, and then I can just have that one video on our YouTube. But yeah, all right, excellent. So what we'll do? Can I ask? So, well, no, you don't have. I was going to say, does anyone think they'll put a proposal on? But you don't need to answer that.
No,
I guess
I won't be, but I'm looking to next year.
Yeah, cool, excellent. And as I said, and I'll put it in the email as well. Sometimes people are really fine, like they're very happy to put a proposal in, but they just don't know the organization or they don't know of an organization. So I can also help link that up. But I do think it's better when the organizations are self-driven from the person because they've already identified that it's something that they, really care about. So, as we get closer to the decisions meeting, we can also talk more about like what are the criteria, what's important for people and what's not important. And we can start to think about the variety of I mean, that's another thing I always encourage people to do is like look back at what we've funded and think about, look, are we biased towards certain areas? Are there opportunities for us to think about other things? So they're all the different things, I guess, that go into making that decision. So it's not only about the proposal, but I think we've tried over the years to get that proposal form to be really thinking about the impact and the outcomes. Because at the end of the day, that will make us feel most secure that if we give it to this organization, it's really going to be put to good use. Okay.
I was actually looking for that information, who we've given to in the past. Where's our website?
I'll see if I can share it.
Give Together. Somebody Give Together.
Givetogether.com.au, but I'll share it on my screen as well.
Maybe yes, okay.
So
maybe if you could share that link when you circulate.
That's a good idea. Yeah, so these
who
are the
we've
ones.
given to. Yeah, so yeah, there we go.
Welfare rights. So you can see, like, we funded 2 years in a row a legal center, which so the group is not like it is always about the combination of the different proposals on the day, I guess. I think that's the beauty of it is that we're not limited. We're not too prescribed about being like, oh, let's do this and then let's do this and let's do this. Like that's where the discussion in that decision meeting, I think, is really helpful because everyone has their own ideas, but then we start to coalesce on an idea. My goal, and I would love if anyone else from Give Together to encourage them is to just have as many people at that discussion meeting as possible, because I think each of us have attended those in the past, and you really can go in thinking one thing and then through the discussion you might end up in a different direction. So I think it's unfortunate if people can't make it, because it just means that they miss on that ability to have that rich conversation. But yes, I'll put that link in the email when I send it out tonight.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well done.
Thanks, team. Good
Thank
luck
you.
to those who are
Thanks.
proposing, and I hope, as always, we'll never make a wrong decision, because we'll always have amazing proposals.
Yeah.
Now, if we submit a proposal, and since you have more of the gut feeling of what people tend to do, can you say, not likely to be funded? Then we can.
I can try. I can try.
Again, before you go to you. Yes.
I can try, but the problem is I sometimes I go in thinking I know exactly what the group is going to vote for, and then it turns out to be not. There are some things I think would be very hard, like funding an individual. You could technically put an individual through, but you'd have to make a very compelling case as to why that would have the impact that we're looking for. Likewise, I remember one year we had someone put UNHCR or something up, and it was like, oh, they're never going to get our money. They're too big, like it's not going to be, but I can try, What I'll generally do is I'll give very candid and honest feedback about where I think proposals could be strengthened, or certain parts to emphasize. And generally I don't vote either. So I won't do a proposal, and I generally won't vote, so that I can just remain impartial and, enjoy the process. All right. It seems my internet is telling me that it's time to go.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.